All right, everyone, let's get rolling on this. I know everybody's time is precious. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm Cindy WalkerPeach. I'm joined by my colleague, Rosemary French. And then we've got two special guests for later in the presentation here. And we're really excited about the interest in our programs as we are launching our next set of mechanisms. So if I could have the next slide, please, I sure would appreciate that. And so these are our two special guests. These are CPRIT reviewers. David Shoemaker will be joining us later on, and Jim Jordan. David is the deputy chair of our Product Development Review Council. These are the folks that are involved in making the recommendations, as well as for both post-award as well as pre-award matters. And Jim Jordan is one of our peer reviewers as well, involved in all aspects of CPRIT, making the original recommendation to make a funding award. Next slide, please. Right, so we're going to start with an overview of the CPRIT Product Development Program and talk a little bit about the SEED, the Telco, and the RELCO award mechanisms that we're going to be offering for this cycle. And then we're going to have the most important part, in my opinion, is the Q&A session. And I know you've seen the instructions on how to do this, but there will be a question box that you'll need to type in your questions. And you can do that pretty much at any time, but you may want to wait and let us get through the presentation, because we may actually answer your question without you having to type it. So if I may have the next slide, please. So just as an overview of the program, here's where we stand as of August of this year. So CPRIT has made a total investment in Texas of about $2.6 billion of the original $3 billion allocated. Of course, we had a new allocation happen in last November 2019, which provided yet another $3 billion. So we'll be starting to work on that, likely in the 2022 timeframe. So as you know, CPRIT has three main funding programs: academic research, product development, and prevention. And if you are a company, or you're a wannabe company, or you think you're a faculty and you want to start a company, product development is where you want to be to fund your company. Academic research is where you might want to be if you want to do academic research at any of the higher eds in the state of Texas, whether you're public or private. And prevention services is the part of the organization that really focuses on providing services across the state of Texas, near term, mostly through nonprofits, to deliver cancer screening type of services. So breast cancer screening and mammography, and we also, through prevention, do survivorship programs and vaccination programs. So for right now, if you think you're a company or you want to be a company, we're going to talk mostly about product development. And to date, we've made 49 awards. So about $480 million worth of funding is flown out to these companies. Of the 49 awards, 42 companies are part of that. So that means some of the companies have won multiple awards. So the thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about going after a CPRIT award, it's not a one and done. And I'll just, kind of forecast this out right now. It's one of the biggest questions we get. Well, am I a seed company and should I go for the $3 million award, or am I more along a Telco company or a RELCO company, or I'm asking for a lot more? If you're asking that question, it's almost always you should be a seed program applicant versus a Telco applicant. So we can wrestle through some of these questions as we go through the presentation today. But we wanted to start with a few of the metrics. So 42 companies have been funded to date. 14 of those are relocation companies. You can see kind of the breakout. 27 are here, are Telco awardees, 14 RELCO, and 8 seed awards. And the seed award numbers are a little low because it's a newer program for us. It's only launched a couple of cycles ago, and we expect that to grow, especially with all the wonderful discoveries that are happening through our academic research group. 6 companies have multiple awards, and if you do the math, you'll find that one company actually has 3 awards. So that's why it works out that way. 17 of those companies are in active clinical trials right now, which is wonderful. And here's kind of a validation of the program as it stands right now. About $3.4 billion in follow-on funding has been raised by the companies after CPRIT funding. And we're really proud of that number. It's a great number, and we want to see that number continue to grow. It means that other people besides CPRIT and CPRIT reviewers have said, huh, this is a cool piece of great product. There's a great market out there for it. Let's get it out there. And we're willing to put our money where our mouths are. So of the companies and the awards, 700 new jobs have been created in the state of Texas. Of course, that will continue to increase. And we have had products launched from the portfolio at this point. They're not in drugs. They're in medical devices and in diagnostics, which are the path to commercial is shorter for all kinds of reasons. But you can kind of see the companies that have now launched some of the products out there. And we're hoping for our first drug launch any time now. We'd love to see that happen. That'll be a great day for CPRIT when the first CPRIT-funded drug hits the market. May I have the next slide, please? So, just high level, what are our priorities in the product development program? We want to fund novel projects. I mean, this is it. We'd love to see disruptive technologies. We'd love to see them in drugs, in diagnostics, medical devices, anything really that has a challenging, unmet clinical need in the cancer space. I can't emphasize that enough. I think in past days at CPRIT, the focus may have just been in drugs, and you'll see our portfolio is heavily weighted to drugs. But if you're in the AI space or in some other kind of non-traditional oncology space, and this will impact cancer patient care, consider coming to CPRIT product development for your funding, even if it's something that's not traditional, like a drug or a diagnostic or a med device. All right. We are investing in early stage projects, right? When private capital is least available in the most part. We would love, it's not exclusive, but we would love to stimulate commercialization of technologies that have been developed at our fabulous Texas institution. It's not a requirement. Most of our companies right now don't have Texas institution intellectual property, but we'd love to see more of that coming our way. And we want to support new company formation in Texas, or attracting new companies to the state of Texas. But the idea here is we want to seed more life sciences experience in various Texas ecosystems. So we want to grow the life science ecosystem specifically in cancer across the state. And of course, we are obligated to return taxpayer, have some kind of return on taxpayer investment. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. May I have the next slide, please? So we're going to keep talking a little bit more about what we're looking for in our objectives in product development. And this hits again on the same kind of concept: novel drugs, novel diagnostics, any kind of application, medical devices, and I've already talked about some non-traditional products. But if there's an impact to cancer treatment and prevention, that is our highest mission at CPRIT. So think about that a little bit. We want to fund Texas-based companies. We've talked about that just a little bit here, that are going to be providing important products into the marketplace. That's the goal. And we want to translate research from Texas institutions into startup companies. So those are the three objectives as we're thinking about the mechanisms. The next slide, please. And here they are. This is the three that we're going to be launching. We've actually posted the RFAs already. The portal will be opening soon. And so we have three main mechanisms that we support right now: the Texas Company Award, or Texco Award. These are early stage companies that are already in the state of Texas. These are fairly large awards. These are up to $20 million. These are 3-year awards. And I'll emphasize a couple of things. Up to $20 million doesn't mean you have to ask for $20 million. It means up to $20 million. We oftentimes have companies come and say, oh, well, we need only $8 or $9 million to do this project. That's fabulous also. Don't feel like you're obligated to be in clinical trials, which is the reason the number is so high. We know being in this space is, it's capital intensive. You've got to set up the right number of clinical trials. And so we wanted to have these mechanisms have enough breadth that if you're at that stage in your company where you are setting up trials and the cost of patient accrual is high, you know that already, that there is the ability to ask for up to $20 million. So that's the Texco, at a very high level, that's the Texco award mechanism. The RELCO is very similar. This is the Texas Relocation Award. except that these are for companies that are not currently in Texas, but are willing to relocate to Texas. All right, so same kind of maybe the maturation of the company is at about the same place, except they're not here yet. And we would like them to consider, if you want to come and consider this award type, relocating your company to the state. So that's the RELCO award. And they're very similar. In fact, when we review them with the same teams because they're really looking at the science and they're looking at the maturation of the company and the size of the company and what the company objectives are. And so they can easily be reviewed by the same teams. The SEED award is different. This is a very different mechanism. It is these are for very early startup companies that are either already based in Texas or willing to relocate. It's a smaller fund. It's $3 million. It's really to get you up and off the ground and get you running. And oftentimes you'll see scientific co-founders. And I know our reviewers will be talking a little bit about this in just a little bit as they give you their perspective on these mechanisms. Key point here, CPRIT is not a one and done. If you're a small company and you think, oh, I might be a seed at this point, not sure I might be a Texco, and you talk to us and we say, yeah, you really are a seed, go for a seed award, get that money and do well with it. And so you can come back later on and then go through the application process for a much larger Texco award at that point. So something to consider. Next slide, please. All right, so here's what our portfolio looks like right now. These are the investments we've made across the state of Texas. You'll see we have a high preponderance in the Houston area, kind of makes sense. And also in Dallas, we're growing a nice little cadre of companies there. Austin's got quite a few. We've got some out in West Texas, so Cerex is out in West Texas, and College Station and San Antonio have a couple as well. They do tend to cluster around the major metros where they'll be able to have access to patients, patient samples, and expertise, but it's not necessary that you locate yourself in a major metro in the state of Texas. But that's what our portfolio is looking like currently. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I mentioned this a few moments ago. CPRIT could never be accused of being risk intolerant. We are very risk tolerant. We believe that, and this is true, a lot of other agencies, funding agencies have this same philosophy that, our money is the first money in. We are there to help de-risk future investment into the company. And so we are very happy to put our money in the best applications going forward. And in this case, we've got a lot that are in the therapeutic space. We also have a small amount in diagnostics and devices, and we're looking to have a few more in the portfolio, and that's in those spaces as well as perhaps in some of the software development space for patient cohorting or clinical trial development and design, or perhaps lead optimization. So we expect we'll eventually see a few of those awardees in our portfolio mix as well, but this is where we currently stand. May I have the next slide, please? All right, so back to the three mechanisms. We're just about ready to, that's kind of the high level view of the program at this point. And we're going to do more of a deep dive now into each one of these mechanisms, both from kind of a contracting point of view, things you should be thinking about when you put your application together. And then at the end, we'll have the perspective from the reviewers on what makes a good application. And so I'd like to move forward with the next slide, and I'm going to pass the baton to Rosemary to speak a little bit about each one of these mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm Rosemary French, Senior Program Manager for Product Development. And now I'd like to dive into some of the key points to consider as an applicant and future grantee. The grants with CPRIT are a contractual relationship with CPRIT, and grantees undergo annual progress report review. Each year they submit a progress report to tell CPRIT about the status of the milestones that they've completed. It's important to consider these kind of post-award things as you put together an application. especially when you're considering the goals and objectives section of an application. Because once a grant is awarded, the money is dispersed according to tranches, and that money is the budget that you propose in your application then translates to those amounts that are dispersed each year. And grantees must fulfill the objectives for each year before they're eligible to receive the funding of the future years. So that's a good point to think about as you write that goals and objectives section of your application. Another key point to keep in mind is the 50% match requirement. For any applicant, a company must raise matching funds in a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you apply for $10 million, for example, the grantee must raise $5 million in external match for a total $15 million project. And then an awardee, the awardee reports to CPRIT on both the money that they spend in CPRIT funds as well as how they spend those matching funds. Another point to consider is the requirement. This is maybe a point that's a bigger issue for seeds and especially early stage companies. The applicant must have a chief executive officer as part of their management team prior to submitting an application. And another key point is the Texas location criteria, which all awardees are required to fulfill. They either must be Texas-based or commit to become Texas-based. So if you're a relocation applicant, for example, you do not have to fulfill these location criteria at the time of application, but you must fulfill them to be a grantee. And to be considered compliant with these criteria, an awardee must fulfill a majority of these 7, meaning that they are able to complete at least 4 of these 7 at all times during the grant award. Next slide, please. Another key point to consider as you put together your application is that the method of how funds are distributed. CPRIT uses 2 methods of disbursement of grant funds, reimbursement and advancement. And under the reimbursement method, grantees are expected to finance their operations with their own working capital. But under the advancement method, CPRIT can distribute grant funds in advance of the grantee incurring expenses. The way that the advance payments work is that CPRIT will advance up to 50% of the project budget year at one time. And the amount of the project year budget is determined by what you propose in the application. The grantee must demonstrate 90% spend of any previous advance before they are eligible to request the next advance. And another key point to consider as you put together your application is this direct link between the funding and completion of your goals and objectives, as I mentioned before. The funding is tranched and tied to the completion of your contract specified milestones. The milestones that you outline in your application, the goals and objectives section, become the milestones in the contract with CPRIT that you must fulfill before year 2 and year 3 funds are dispersed. Next slide, please.
Rosemary, if you don't mind, let me break in on that because this is such an important point. And I don't think people, when they apply, don't really grasp how important this point is. So whatever you propose in your proposal around these goals and objectives, they become contracted at you are awarded a CPRIT fund, and they can't be changed during that process. During the contract, we don't renegotiate the goals and objectives during the contracting process. And there are ways to change them after that, but you should be aware that whatever you've placed in your proposal, those particular goals and objectives are going to drive the ability for funding. And Rosemary mentioned tranching, which just means proportions of the amount that you would receive from us based on completing those goals and objectives. So be thoughtful when you're writing your goals and objectives. That's the bottom line. Make sure that's what you want to do. If you say you're going to hire somebody, if you're going to do this particular mouse model, then we're going to hold you to it because that's what you get reviewed on. So thank you for letting me put a finer point on that, Rosemary.
Thank you, Cindy. Next slide, please. Another point to consider as a grantee is the revenue sharing commitment. And the amount of revenue sharing with CPRIT depends on the type of technology that CPRIT funds. The key point here is the cap on the royalty. So for a therapeutic, there's a 3 to 5% royalty with a 4x cap on the award amount. And once the payment back to CPRIT reaches that 4x threshold, the royalty then drops to 0.5%. For devices, diagnostics, and services, it's a 3 to 5% royalty until the payment reaches a 2.5x cap, and then the royalty also drops down to 0.5%. More details on these revenue sharing commitments can be found on the CPRIT website. Next slide. Our peer review process is multi-stage. For this particular cycle, the deadline is January 27th. Applicants then undergo an initial screening teleconference and are scored. Applicants that score high enough are then invited to the peer review meeting, which in previous cycles has been held in person, but this cycle will be a virtual teleconference. Those applications are then scored again, and ones that score well enough move on to the due diligence phase of review. And in the diligence phase, these applications are scored yet again, and ones that score well enough are then presented to the Program Integration Committee and CPRIT's Oversight Committee for final review and approval. If you apply by the January 27th deadline, those awards will be announced in August of 2021. Next slide. Again, here are the dates. Our RFAs, Telco, Relco, and SEED are all posted now to CPRIT's website. The application portal opens December 2nd and closes January 27th. The virtual in-person, so to speak, presentation will be in April of 2021, and those awards will be announced in August. We have not yet announced dates for future cycles. However, if the product development research continues with the calendar dates that we've used in the past, it's possible that we would release RFAs in summer 2021, and those awards would be announced in February of 2022. Next slide. And now I'd like to turn the discussion over to two of our reviewers. One is David Shoemaker. He's the Deputy Chair of our Product Development Review Council. And then following David, we will have Jim Jordan, a peer reviewer for development research. Please take it away, David.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So you've already heard about the two different mechanisms, the SEED awards versus the Telco, Relco awards, and I'm just going to cover those at a very high level here. What I'm trying to do today is to improve the quality of the applications that we get for awards at CPRIT. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I think CPRIT is to be commended because the quality of the applications has continued to improve throughout that time period. But there are still some applications that just aren't up to the quality, and they're not considered as seriously as some of the more experienced applicants' applications. So as Rosemary and Cindy said, the startups are early stage. They do need to have a commercial concept, though. We're not just looking at scientific experiments. We want to know where you're headed, and to know where you're headed, you really need to think about developing your clinical plan. That's the first part of your integrated product development plan. Of course, we want novel technologies, And we look at those for, as Rosemary and Cindy said, drugs, biologics, devices, diagnostics. You need to have a business plan to accompany that clinical plan. And the clinical plan needs to be backed up. You just can't go out and get a key opinion leader and put them on your grant and have them design a clinical program. You need to have the non-clinical program that supports that clinical plan fleshed out, and you need to have the CMC manufacturing for the product and the timing to provide product for those clinical and preclinical studies. And you have to have the regulatory concept of what you're going to be doing when you're interacting with the regulatory authorities. So you are best advised to have an experienced product developer write your application. People that just step out of the clinic or step out of the lab and try to put these applications together do not do very well. The Telco and Relco awards, same principle, just further along. And these are typically established companies. They have already put their team together. They are shooting for an IND within the year or an IDE within the year. They're further along. It's not so much a concept, but they have real data. They've explored the animal studies that support clinical or non-clinical safety, and they may not have completed their IND enabling toxicology studies, but they have a good grasp on the relative safety of their product. These, again, are veteran, experienced product development teams. They may have fewer consultants, but a consultant is fine as long as they're committed to the team. What is important is that you have a full team when you apply for one of these Telco or Relco awards. You're still able to add team members, but if you don't have a team assembled when you apply, I can tell you that your application is going to be deficient compared to some companies that have their teams assembled. Also, a management team that has raised funds previously is a very, very good idea. I mean, some people going out and trying to raise funds to support the matching funds for CPRIT that have never raised funds before are not going to have a very good result. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go into a little bit deeper description of these seed early development. Again, startup companies, maybe the company, is just in the nascent period of being formed. That's fine. What's important is a novel technology and an idea of where you're going. So you can be 2 to 3 years away from going into humans, and that's fine with us. What we do want to see is early pharmacodynamic proof of concept. And this is not just in one model. This is in several models. This ideally is not just in cells, but can be in animals as well. So you're starting to collect preliminary preclinical safety data. It could be that you have corroboration from the literature. It could be you have corroboration from a collaborating lab, but the reviewers want to see absolute support for the proof of concept. And then, as I said before, it's early, but we want to know, have your clinical plan laid out where you're going, and then the clinical plan requires that preclinical studies support that. If you've got a clinical study, your first clinical study that's going to be going on for 6 months, you better have preclinical coverage for that toxicology in your plan. Otherwise, we know that you haven't developed a drug before and you don't understand what's required. Similarly, regulatory. None of our seed companies typically have met with FDA, but they should know where in their development plan they're going to meet with FDA or some other regulatory authority. And then also preliminary commercialization strategy. This is where, the experience comes in. You can't just come up with an idea. You need to have given it some thought as to where it's going to fit into the commercial landscape. Next slide, please. So the Telco or Relco stage applications are much more advanced than the seed grants, and that's why they're able to request more monies. But the IDE or the IND should be near at hand. There should be a very clear path regulatorily for when that application is going to be submitted and hopefully cleared. The proof of concept should be solid. The preliminary assay validation work, are you going to be assaying your product in blood, in plasma? How is that going to work? You need to have experts in pharmacokinetics and clinical pharmacology who are advising you if you don't have one on your team. Pilot toxicology studies. It's okay to complete your GLP toxicology studies right before you submit your IND, but you should have some sense, as I said before, of the safety of your product at this stage of the application. And the completed CMC studies, you should know how you're going to make it, and you should have some preliminary stability data on how you're going to eventually set an expiration date for your product when you're on the market. Management, again, it's got to be a team, and it's got to be complete. You can draw on consultants so long as they integrate well into this grant application. And it may be that the consultant is the one who writes the application because they have the most experience across the different disciplines. And that's okay, as long as everybody contributes their significant part to their discipline. The first order of business is the completed target product profile. This is in the application. It is a goal. It is where you're headed, both clinically and non-clinically, as well as a little bit of CMC. But you need to know what are the studies you're going to do at a high level. The integrated product development plan is going from 30,000 feet down to the details. And it is actually very advisable for you to complete an integrated product development plan, because that leads directly to the goals and objectives that Rosemary and Cindy were talking about. If you know where you're headed, you know the timing, you know the studies you're going to do, the goals and objectives fall out of this document. Obviously, you also have to have done your due diligence in intellectual property. And again, you need to know where you're headed commercially in order to be successful. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim, and he can take it a little bit more specifically into medical devices and in vitro diagnostics.
Thank you. Next slide. So I have everything here on one slide, but I want to step back and just reiterate something that David said in the importance of the team. So, you know, this journey that you're going to take for a startup is a balancing of meeting customer requirements, meeting investors' needs, and having an exit. And that's a simultaneous equation that, unless you've experienced the journey, is very hard to put together. And so to David's point, a lot of people come at this from a scientist perspective, and they just simply haven't been exposed to that. And like your learnings in your science, people on the team have these other learnings. So what David talked about in the pharma side is, you know, how do we have our development program? How do we identify our leads? How do we optimize and select our candidates and enable our studies and demonstrate that you can manufacture, and then develop a clinical development plan with the right people associated with it? This is no difference in medical devices and diagnostics. It's just simply that the process is different. And so there's a process associated with every single vertical. So in the medical device and diagnostic business, it's quite normal for pharmaceutical companies to have huge segments. We like to see segments that have a significant potential of 200 million plus. In the medical device and diagnostic business, it's a little different in the exit criteria that you would have in a pharmaceutical. Generally, if you get something to a phase 2A or phase 3, you're going to find a incumbent partner, a Merck, or someone who's going to take care of those commercial aspects for you. In the case of medical devices, there was a time where you could actually get an approval and sell your company, but these days, quite frankly, you're going to have to demonstrate revenue. So in that spirit, you want to make sure that you can articulate whether you're a new category doing something new and different, or whether you're an improvement to an existing category. And we're more interested, as Cindy was saying earlier, in new categories, because anything that's an improvement in an existing category, there's probably already an incumbent, and you're going to have some sort of sales channel challenges there. And so that leads us to the next bullet, is we want to understand, since you do have to go to selling, unlike maybe pharmaceuticals, you need to be able to articulate what is your sales strategy. Are you going to sell directly and build a sales force? Are you going to work with distributors? Do you understand the formularies in the industry? So for example, if your company's going through a distributor like McKesson or AmerisourceBergen, they actually negotiate big multi-billion-dollar contracts with people. And so the question is, what's your strategy and how you're going to get in there? Do you have an existing PCT or a patent? That's very important. And I'll also take a moment at this point to talk about, you may be asked, if you are in a tight patent landscape, if you have freedom to operate. Now, those are two different things, and I'll explain. So patent says you have the right to do the thing. A freedom to operate says when you do the thing that you have the right to do, you don't infringe on somebody else's product. And so generally when it's a clean new category, it's not as much an issue, but if you have a tight category, it's something that you will be asked. Do you understand the competitive landscape and design requirements of your product? Do you understand how it has to move through the distribution chain? For example, right now, one of the complaints we're hearing about some of the first COVID vaccines, the refrigeration and freezer aspects of them may make it impractical to distribute outside of major urban areas, right? So these are things that we would probably ask you in the room. And do you have clinical evidence? Do you have those benchmarks, that biocompatibility data, and some of those other aspects that you need? Do you understand the clinical pathway that you need to take? So a BLA is a biologic. It's a medical device that's combined with something that has a chemical reaction or a biological action in the body. It's sort of a drug device kind of feeling. Is it pre-market approval? Is it a 510K? Those are very different pathways. There are experts out there to help and guide you on the way. What's your reimbursement strategy? Is the existing CPT code to pay the doctors? Is the existing code in the hospital to cover that expenses? Do you have animal data? And maybe sometimes you have first in human data. And do you have the technical team to help you there? And so that's sort of between both sides of diagnostics and medical devices. Those are very similar things, except on the diagnostic side, there's a standard called CLIA. So you can have a 510K or a PMA approved product, but you can also have a CLIA lab. And a CLIA lab allows you to bring in the test and you test it yourself. And the challenge with that very frequently is you'll get to a certain revenue number and you'll be asked to provide clinical evidence. And a lot of people say, well, it gets to sales without having that clinical trial. Well, that clinical trial can be very costly. And at that point, you might have problems with your investors. So we're going to want to know that you have an understanding of that journey and what that takes. And again, the technical aspects and the distribution of that. So again, they're both sort of similar, but the differences here with these two categories is the expectation that we would have that you would have to demonstrate revenue before you have an exit, and therefore there's some other considerations that you would need to have that you wouldn't need to have perhaps in a pure pharmaceutical. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for that. So this is some information on, questions after this. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, either through, if it's for mechanical things like how do I make my application go in the portal, that's the CPRIT help desk. But if you have content questions, you can reach out to start with Rosemary. And now I'm also available at least until December 2nd, which is pretty short amount of time between now and then. Next slide, please. I think we're down to the Q&A piece. So there's some information on how to actually submit questions on the Q&A into the question box, and we'll start taking these now. One kind of overarching theme of some of the questions I've been browsing through them is, yes, the slide deck, as well as the recording of the webinar today will be available on CPRIT's site. I think it takes a couple of days for that to happen, but it will be available. And so I'm going to just start with the first question, and then we'll go from there. So the question is, do you feel that CPRIT's RFA cycles are back on track? So yes, we did take a short hiatus in our offerings of the grant mechanisms because of the budget uncertainties surrounding COVID and the crush of the oil industry here in Texas. But we are back on track, and I think actually product development is the laggard here. We're just now bringing ours back on track. Our colleagues in both academic research are all they're full up and moving forward full steam, and so is prevention. And so with this offering, we are now back on track. So you can expect to see our regular 2 cycles per year, barring, and again, everything, you know, we are a state of Texas agency, barring any further issues with COVID or anything else that could happen in the future. There's nothing for certain, but we believe we're back on track at this point. We are for 21 and for 22. Okay, I'll take the next one too. Are veterinary cancer projects, diagnostics, prevention, therapy eligible for consideration? It's hard to say based on the question. If your ultimate target is an animal versus a human, those are probably not going to be favorably allowed. If it's an animal that's an intermediate with the ultimate goal of having some impact on human cancer patient care, then yes, we would consider that. Please reach out to us afterwards, and we can learn a bit more about what you're thinking about, and then we can give you some better advice. But in general, if it's, you know, leukemia in cats or something in horses, it's unlikely we would fund that unless there's an ultimate goal for human patient cancer care. Okay. All right. All right. I'll take this next one too. Rules for relocation. So I would encourage y'all to think about content questions here too. A lot of these are kind of the mechanics of the application type questions. You've got 2 reviewers who have joined us today, and they would love to entertain your thoughts on, you know, what would make a good application, right? So if you've been thinking about that, you want to add those into into the question box as well. But I'll take this next one. This is another mechanical one. The rules for relocation to Texas. It says the recipients have to meet 4 of those 7. You're absolutely correct. And you get to pick. You can select which 4 of the 7 you would like to meet. You have to meet those 4 out of 7 prior to receiving any funding. And as a relocation company, you have a year to do that. Okay? So I hope that answers your question. So everyone needs to understand there are 7 of these rules. You have to meet the majority, so that would be 4 out of 7. You have a year to do that, but you cannot receive any funding until you meet those criteria. All right, Rosemary, I think you wanted to take the next one.
Sure. So here's a question about timeline for matching funds. Does this need to be done before the award? The good news is no. An applicant does not have to have matching funds raised at the time of application, and they do not have to have the match even at time of award announcement. But at a minimum, they must have the match raised associated with their year 1 budget before funds will be dispersed. And they must continue to show proof of match before additional funds will be released for the future years. Another question, if you're approved for award in August 2021, when will funding actually take place? If your award is announced in August 2021, the contract start date is typically the last day of August 31st or so. And from the start of the contract onward, grantees can start accruing expenses that, if allowable by CPRIT, could be reimbursed. But there's no look back. An awardee is not able to count expenses that occurred before the date of announcement. Is there any help available from past awardees or consulting groups? That may be possible, but not really facilitated by CPRIT. You'd be encouraged to reach out to your own networks and finding those types of contacts. I'm sure they're out there. Are there any mock applications?
Rosemary, let me add a little bit more flavor to that as well. So across the state of Texas, there are many bio affiliates here in the state of Texas. One of the biggest one is in Houston. It's called Bio Houston. But they have companion organizations in Austin, in Dallas, San Antonio, El Paso has a big one. If you're in those areas, you can certainly reach out to those groups. That is the ecosystem that we have in the state of Texas right now. And those can connect you with much broader group of people that can help you with either your application or finding your team members, people you want to have consulting with. I would highly encourage you to get into the ecosystem so you can start networking and find the right people to help you along.
Another question, are any mock applications or successfully funded applications available as a reference? We get this one pretty often. We've looked into it, but due to how sensitive the information is in an application and how much would need to be redacted to be able to make a mock application public, CPRIT does not offer those this time. Now here's one maybe for David. Does a PD award request for over 15 million receive more scrutiny, and is the approval bar higher than an award request for 7.5 million? For companies that received 2 awards for the same product, what are examples of the types of activities that were included in the first versus the second award? So 2 questions.
So the first question, there is no difference depending upon the budget. It's looked at on its merits, the work that's done. You know, is the budget justified for each of those 2 applications? And that's how it's evaluated. So I would say no difference based on total amount. And with regard to a second company, I think Cindy might be better, but I'll start. A lot of companies have second products, and it's not just follow-on stuff with their initial grant. So Cindy?
That's absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it is the same product and they've moved it from one development phase to another development phase. For instance, a seed company originally that now is going to do clinical work on the same product. And so they would then go for a Telco award. But oftentimes we will see Telco awardees have different indications. You may start with one indication, be moving that along quite successfully, find out that their drug product or their diagnostic is also applicable to a second type of disease. And then that is their second application. We see that quite often with our multiple award winners. And we love that kind of stuff. So encourage you all to move forward with that. Okay, the next question I think is, should the company be committed to cancer? Is neuroscience okay? The company should be committed to some form of cancer product development. If neuroscience is an intermediate to get to a cancer product that's going to impact cancer patients, then we'd be okay with that. But if it's a pure play neuroscience product with no impact in the cancer marketplace, then we will not entertain that one.
Here's a question around timing and when is first. Say we plan to file our first product IND near the same time as the CPRIT RFA. I'm guessing that might mean as the same time as the deadline for applications. Clinical trials could start a couple months after IND, assuming approval. Can the goals of the application include submitting IND and starting clinical trials if the award hasn't been yet approved? You'll want to think about the types of activities that will go from the date of award announcement onward, since the funds are not dispersed until after the award announcement, and there's no look back. So you'll want to think about activities essentially for the purposes of this application cycle. You'll want to think about September 2021 onward, since the contract start date will be the end of August 2021 for this particular cycle. There's a question about royalty terms. Those are all laid out on the CPRIT website in detail. Maybe go ahead, Cindy.
So yeah, I was going to toss this one to Jim. So any disadvantage in a resubmission application?
I actually think that we've seen some of our resubmission applications really have a significant learning between cycles. And so I would say no, but do your homework because you will get feedback. And I think that's one of the things that you know, David that runs our group always asks, that we have very constructive feedback for people that's actionable so that they can make better applications next time. So I think we've had a reasonable success rate with that. Some people don't take the advice and they fail again, but quite a few people have been very successful.
Okay, so here's the next one again about resubmissions. Can you go over the resubmission and how they are handled differently? Okay, so I think we've done the handle differently from the review point of view. You are allowed to make a resubmission. We would encourage you to get interact with CPRIT and find out as much as possible about why you were not awarded, you weren't recommended for an award. That should help you with your resubmission. Okay, for a seed award application, does the technology, so let's see, need to be out licensed from an academic institution for an academic PI acting as a founder? I am not quite sure exactly the question here. So you are likely to need to have licensed the technology. If your question is, do you need to have it before you make an application for an award? The answer is no, but you will need to have an option or some other form that will tie that technology into your company. I hope that's what you're asking. I believe that's probably what you're asking. We will do diligence on the intellectual property before making an award recommendation. So you definitely need to have access to it because we are funding companies here. We're not funding academic labs. So the technology needs to flow very, very tightly into the company before we can make a company award. I think that's maybe what you're asking, but please don't hesitate to follow up with us after this call, and we should be able to ferret out exactly what you're asking and get you the right answer.
Cindy, can I interpret that from some experiences I've had?
Please do.
Yeah, so here in Pittsburgh, we have two universities with two very different intellectual property arrangements. So one school, the intellectual property belongs to the school and the professor. And in that case, you know, you need to have the kind of licensing agreement and a release from the school that you're talking about. The other school allows professors to keep their own IP, and they aren't tied by that. And so in that case, the professor could go out and form his own company without having a documentation from the school. But what he does have, we would do in due diligence, is make sure that while he was at the university's policy recognizes that it's his intellectual property. I think that might have been where the question was going.
Here's a question on matching funds. Do the matching funds need to be on funding the same project, or is it for the company? The answer is yes, the matching funds need to be on the same project as what you're using CPRIT funds to support. Grantees will submit to CPRIT expenses both for the CPRIT funded parts of the project as well as for how they spend the matching funds. Cindy, here's a question on success rates. How many applications were there that resulted in the 49 awards? Would you like to put that one?
Yeah, read that one more time. I barely got it.
I think this person's alluding to success rates. They're asking how many applications were there that resulted in the number of awards to date?
You're asking for total applications, and I don't remember the total applications, but I can tell you our funding success rate it hovers around 10% for each of our application cycles. We had one cycle that didn't make that grade, but over the course of all of our cycles, we are right at 10%. It's like 10.1% as our funding success rate, and that's across all three of our mechanisms, very focused just in product development, not all of CPRIT, just in product development. So 10.1% is our funding success rate currently.
Thank you, Cindy. Here's one for David. If the new co is a fresh spin out, but it is based on technology that already showed safety and signs of efficacy in a phase 1 trial, would it be more suitable for a seed or a Texco mechanism?
I would go for the Texco mechanism if it was me. If you have the data already in humans, there's no reason to go back for a seed if you're that far down the road, or a relco if you're not located in Texas. But once you have human data, you're in a whole nother ball game in terms of the reviewers' minds, in terms of the regulators' minds. And so it would be off to the races from my perspective.
Thank you, David. Cindy, this one's for you. How do you see the next legislative session and budget impacts affecting the future of funding through CPRIT?
So I don't think we're going to see a big impact. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the legislators are going to do this year. We have a big impact, of course, through COVID. As I alluded to early on, the oil industry has been hit a little bit as well, which is, you know, where a lot of Texas funding comes from, of course. And so I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Indications seem to be that we'll be fine, but you know, all agencies have been asked to take some amount of funding out of their budget to date. But only time will tell. We'll know when the legislature gets started. We are fine for this year, you know, for this cycle, this 2021 cycle. So I would encourage you, if you think this is something you want to do, I would encourage you to apply during this cycle.
Here's a question about resubmissions. If an initial application was submitted to request funds for early development and preclinical studies but was not funded, would a subsequent application to request funds for clinical studies be considered a resubmission, even though this is a different stage of the project? The answer is yes. When you're making a consideration of whether a technology is a resubmission, it's based on the project. And if you're applying with the same project, even at a later stage, it would potentially be considered a resubmission. But another aspect of whether or not it's a resubmission is the timing of the last time you applied. If it's been more than 2 years since your last application, it may be possibly considered a new application. The RFA clearly spells out the timing and whether, depending on the time that you last submitted, whether it might be considered a resub or a new application.
So is the next one about, the next one is, can funds from the award be used to purchase capital equipment for a drug product manufacturing facility to be set up in Texas? Okay, so the question is this for the company or is this for the drug manufacturing facility? If it's for the company, we'll entertain it. If it's for something we won't, and I'm not sure if it means that it's going to be a drug manufacturing facility that's set up in Texas only for this drug or for another. So follow up. We just need more clarity on that to be able to answer. But in general, we entertain pieces of equipment. Yes, absolutely. So. Okay.
I'll take this next one. If one's business model does not fit all aspects as you have outlined, what are the options? How to get feedback? That would be me and Cindy. Reach out to CPRIT, tell us about your project, what you have in mind, and we can share guidance on whether there might be a fit.
And I will also add, there are groups in our ecosystem that I've already mentioned. There are many CPRIT companies in Texas now. There are 42, and 6 of them have won second awards. I would reach out to some of the CEOs of those companies and say, look, I am thinking about doing a CPRIT award. I'd love to get your experience on how it went with you, and what piece of advice would you give to me as a potential new applicant? So we're part of our mission at CPRIT is to create ecosystem and networking. So I would, you can reach out to the 2 of us. We can give you our experience, but I think it would be important to also reach out to the winners of the current awardees. And you can find all of those names on our website. All 49 of the awards are listed on our website. You can find exactly who those companies are and reach out to them.
Here's a question for David. How does CPRIT view proposals with assets in later stage clinical trials? These typically require more money. Is it more difficult to secure CPRIT funding for these assets?
Again, I would say no. It really depends on the application quality. If you're, laser focused on the clinical study that you need the money for, CPRIT is more than willing to consider late stage. That actually is better for CPRIT because there's a better chance you're going to put a feather in their cap by making it to market. So we do fund early stage, risky investments, but we're about getting returns on the investments that we make. So a solid clinical program would be attractive for CPRIT to invest in. Cindy, you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's not much I can add to that.
One caveat though is that CPRIT will not fund typically beyond phase 2A up to 100 employees. There's more details in the RFA. We will fund phase 1 and phase 2, but there are limits beyond that on what CPRIT will fund.
What is the typical team for a company applying for a seed fund? The seed mechanism. Do they all have to be employed in the company? Jim, you want to talk about the typical team needed for a company to apply for a seed? Well, David, while he's working that out, do you want to talk about the typical seed company, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, we have seed applications that are submitted by clinicians that have gathered a team of consultants around them to flesh out the application. As I said in my talk, the team has to be knowledgeable enough to submit a viable application. So one person won't be able to complete the application successfully unless they access the experts needed to convince the reviewers that they know what they're doing. So the team, some teams that are funded by CPRIT are extremely small, but they've enlisted the help of experienced consultants that assist them in putting together the application and in developing their product.
Thank you, David. Next question, if a company is awarded a seed, then later a Texco, are the royalty obligations additive? By CPRIT's current rules, no, they are not. But keep in mind that the royalty cap is based on an X multiple of the award amount. So if a first award is some amount, the next award is another amount, royalty cap would be a combination of those two award amounts.
The other thing to keep in mind with the second award is the match requirement is different from a first award to a second award, and it's not 2 to 1 anymore, it's 1 to 1. So as you're contemplating that, you need to build that into your thinking.
Right, so the first time you apply for a CPRIT award, match requirement is a 2 to 1 ratio. Successfully awarded and coming back for another award, the match requirement is 1 to 1.
Are there different standards, and I'm assuming this is from a reviewer point of view, are there different standards for the development plan substance between pharmaceuticals and medical devices and diagnostics? Of the requirements in the RFAs are geared towards therapeutics.
So the answer is a mixed yes. There are specific milestone differences. So each vertical has their own steps they need to go through to get regulatory approval and provide clinical evidence. And each type of organization in terms of proof of manufacturing ability would be very different from a pharmaceutical and medical device. So I think you have to take the time to understand the pathway of the vertical you're pursuing. And again, there's plenty of standards that are out there, and show that you're matching those. And in fact, I was going to point out earlier when someone was asking about a reapplication, a lot of times people get feedback on missteps for their vertical or that their goals are out of order, and we're asking them to reorganize them to come back to match the industry standards. And so that's where the differences would be.
And Jim, I've got another one here for you. We are involved with the development of a medical device seeking a seed grant. Most investors are looking for a viable exit strategy, which include acquisition of the company within 3 to 5 years. How do reviewers look at potential acquisition by entities outside of Texas?
So we'd be looking that you understand who the companies are that would buy you, so that you would have a sense of who those folks are, that you would have a sense of what their buying triggers are. So a lot of these companies will articulate or they'll demonstrate through their public record. They buy after FDA approval, they buy at a certain revenue number, and your plans have to show that you have a pathway to, or at least plan the journey to get there. So obviously a pre-seed. Articulating how you're going to get to sales is very different. When you're early stage, you're expecting to show how you're going to get to sales, but the importance is being able to match those expectations. Our biggest fear is companies that call themselves a platform company because they don't decide early on what business model they're going to be, and by the time they're ready to be merged or they're ready to be acquired, their business model doesn't match that of the acquirer and they're not interested. So those are important considerations along the way.
Thanks, Jim. Here's one for David. We may not have solidified our lead indication and propose the test in multiple cancer types. Do we address each cancer type in the business plan as well as development plan TPP?
You know, we've reviewed grants and applications that have done it both ways. I think a lot of therapeutics, you realize, are started with a all-comers phase 1 study to discern what is their best pursuit for a market. Nonetheless, we do encourage you to think about very seriously those applications that you're going to, or those indications that you're going to be pursuing, and analyze each of those. What are the most likely indications that you're going to be pursuing? You know, typically a company will propose 3 indications that they're going after, even though they haven't decided exactly which one.
David, are academic consultants allowed on seed grants?
Absolutely. Academic consultants are the core of the science and the core of the clinicians' input on many of our grants. So, but they need to be sort of kept in their disciplinary areas. That's not sufficient. So having we've had one key opinion leader, an academician, who's been on probably 5% of our grants, and it's meaningless. So you want to make sure that you enlist the aid of an academic consultant who's going to roll up his sleeves and contribute to your program.
Thank you, David. Another question for you. Can you expand on your comment regarding PD data? Are you suggesting in vitro and rodent PK, rodent and canine acute PK PD studies, efficacy studies in cells, and in vivo mouse xenograft models?
You know, all of the above. Obviously, the xenograft models are the gold standard that we would like to see for proof of concept. But we will, and a lot of companies don't do that, and they're almost ruled out a priori. If you have the ability to do xenograft studies, that is extremely valuable. And the PK PD only supports those results. So all of the data, we'll take as much data as you can generate in the time that you have before the application.
Thank you, David. Question for Cindy. If a seed awardee plans to apply for a Texco, is there a way to argue for a 2-to-1 match rather than 1-to-1 match due to the much greater capital requirement jump between the two?
So you're always free to argue. If you think you've got a good argument, you're welcome to present it. I can tell you we've never agreed to it. So you may or may not want to spend time on doing that. The reason we have the 1-to-1 match is because we're already in your deal. And so we're going to put more money in. We're going to expect more out of it, right? So we haven't agreed to change that at this point. But you're always free to try and argue it.
Question for Jim. Is it frowned upon to apply for a CPRIT award if cancer is a secondary indication for your therapeutic? Or David, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the answer being to me when you reach your final goals, what sort of significance are you talking about? So I guess from that perspective, if 90% of the company was going to be interventional cardiology and 5% or 10%, then I probably would be concerned about the reason why they got involved with us. But if it was the other way around, we'd certainly entertain it.
Here's a question for David. For seed applications, if the technology is a reformulation of existing biologic therapy, will we still need extensive PD data, or would biodistribution data showing possible benefit be enough?
It depends on the extent of the reformulation, quite frankly. If the reformulation questions the reviewers, consideration of what those reformulation efforts would yield in the animal, then yes, you're going to need that data. If it's a minor reformulation, then it would be fine to go with the data that you have. It's really a pretty straightforward scientific question based on the extent of the reformulation.
I'll take, Rosemary, I'll take both of these matching questions at the same time. So we've got two matching questions here. Does the company need to show 50% match fund arrangement at the time of application or at the time of award? And the answer is it's at the time of award. And some even spend a few months after the award getting their match certified by us. So you don't have to have it at time of application. That's the key here. You can get that later, but before you can receive funding from CPRIT, you have to have your match certification done. The second match question says, for the 50% matching funds, can an NIH or DOD, looks like, if you meant indirect or do you mean direct funds be used? If so, over what time frame? Yeah, so the answer is your matching funds can be in many forms. It can be your NIH grant, absolutely, a DOD grant that's applicable. The key is it's got to be applicable to the work that you're proposing to do at CPRIT. It could be another grant that's at the state level. It could be VC funding, it could be angel funding. The match component can be any of those types of matching. The time is the question. You can't spend any of that money before the CPRIT funds are awarded. So if you've got it and you've spent it already, then it doesn't qualify for your match, right? But if you've got some funding that you're waiting until CPRIT funds land and then you're putting that in as your match, then those will qualify. And that includes your grants, your NIH grants, or NSF grants, or any other type of grant. The key is there's got to be money in the bank, and you're going to certify that through CPRIT before we are going to be sending out any checks. So I hope that addressed your question. You're welcome to call us and get additional clarity as necessary.
Here's another one. Can companies contract assay testing to an academic institution? Yes. Companies can use a clinical research organization. They could use an academic institution that they contract with. Those activities are allowable. Here's maybe one for Jim. How should an applicant assess seed versus a RELCO readiness for a digital solution?
Well, I think the basis of that question is the difference between beta and revenue is so quick. I think is the basis there. So it really would be where are they on scale? If they're well into their revenue, I think it's the latter. And if they're still in their beta, it's probably the seed.
Here's one for David. What is your recommendation for balancing applications with employee salaries / consultant fees versus capital expenses and material costs?
That's a tough one. I think it depends what stage you're at. If you're really going great guns at that stage, you're almost in the clinic, then I think it's more of an investment in materials and in studies, and and I'm not talking about brick and mortar. I think we have CPRIT companies that are doing very well outsourcing all of their work, so they can do that. If you have the coordination to run a multiplex team made up of consultants, that's fine. But they need to know, they need to understand their jobs, and they need to, you know, obviously produce. And the project management element comes in when you're using many consultants as opposed to building a brick and mortar company and building it out from within. But in these days, you know, especially with biologics, manufacturing is becoming so complex that most of the companies that we see are outsourcing to contract manufacturing organizations. They're outsourcing their clinical work to clinical research organizations or contract research organizations. So that's the way of the world right now. So there are very few companies that are investing a lot in brick and mortar and you know, hiring any more than what is required to fill out their senior leadership team.
Thanks, David. Here's one that I get a lot that I think is a really good question. If a drug candidate works for multiple cancer types, is it better to focus on a specific indication, or is it okay to propose multiple indications?
Is that for me again? Because I think we already answered this. It really comes down to, you know, obviously multiple indications are more expensive. It's going to require more money. I'm always of the opinion as a regulatory scientist, which I've been doing for 30 years now, to laser focus on one indication and get that approved and start generating revenue with which you can develop the other indications. It just makes more sense to me from a financial perspective. I've seen many companies go aground trying to do too many indications.
Thank you, David. Here's one for Jim. In regards to diagnostic applications, can CPRIT funding apply to companies that would develop and produce RUO tests that are sold to third-party CLIA labs?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Jim knows we're coming to the end of our time, so that was a short and sweet answer. So we're gonna go through this list and just pick the most important ones at this point because we've only got a few more minutes. But if we don't get to your question, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Rosemary, what else we got?
Our medical device, I'll take this one. Our medical device companies with an FDA approval that are starting sales in the U.S. able to apply. The answer is that CPRIT will only fund product development activities. Once you get to the commercial and sales side of things, that's really beyond what CPRIT will typically fund. I've also seen a few questions about eligible expenses. CPRIT has a policy and procedures guide on our website with details. At a high level, we'll fund everything from preclinical to clinical activities, salary, you know, all the main steps to get your product to market. It's typically advisable to focus on including budget items that will advance the development of the project. But there's a wide range of expenses that are allowable, and you can look at our policy and procedure guide for more info.
So I get this question a lot. What about nonprofits? I know there's some more questions here and we'll get to them. Nonprofits are absolutely eligible to apply as long as they have a product that they're going to be bringing to market. So if you've got a product, you just happen to be a nonprofit, that's fine with us, and we're willing to fund that. But you have to have a product that you're bringing to market.
Here's a question on scoring. I'll take this one. Applications are scored on a scale of 1 to 9, with 1 being the highest. What is the typical range of scoring for applications being picked by CPRIT? I think it's usually around 3 is a pretty strong score. David, I don't know if you can comment more on that. The range of scores that typically fall within the cutoff of what we'll fund.
I would say in a typical review session, we have scores that range from 2 up to 5 or 6. And we end up moving forward to due diligence those companies that are hovering around 3. Rarely, and I don't remember ever moving a company forward who had an average score above 4.
Okay, advice on how to work with the Texas ecosystem and CPRIT's view on this file. We have a strong support of several academic groups outside of Texas and the NCI. Terrific. However, we are in direct conflict with an academic and MD Anderson through their investment in a competitor. Well, I can't really address that. If you have a good business plan and a good product development plan and you want to find yourself in Texas, it looks like you've got a lot of outside supporters outside of the state of Texas, apply, right? We can't manage what happens at MD Anderson. We can't manage your application with regard to any of our other companies that we're funding. We are agnostic as to that kind of stuff. If you've got a good piece of technology, you've got a great team that's wrapped around that technology, you've got a good product development plan to bring that technology forward, it's likely that we're going to fund, right? So think of us as a funder. That's all we are. We're not trying to pick winners in particular ecosystems in different regions of Texas. So sounds like you might consider applying.
Here's one for you, Cindy. How much is awarding in this particular round?
So we have a new budget for 2021, and the research award funding is pretty much set. The prevention award funding is set at 10%, so around 28 million goes into prevention. So the rest of it goes into research. So research is split into two components. That's the academic research piece and the product development research piece. And, so we've got about, $250 million that we need to disperse in this round between the work that academic research is doing and the work that product development is doing.
For David, for a cancer prevention therapeutic, would the goal need to be a cancer prevention label, or could it be a precancerous lesion treatment label? The paths to approval would be quite different.
Yeah, either one of those would be fine. I mean, CPRIT is about, therapies that are going to help those potentially confronted with an oncology disease. So either one of those would be fine, even though the paths would be different, as you say.
So there are a few questions we haven't been able to get to, but please do reach out to us. We're happy to entertain these questions kind of individually at this point. I want to thank our two reviewers for joining us today. Thank you, David, so much for your time, and thank you, Jim, for your time. Much appreciated. And thank you all for joining. And we hope we will see you again with your proposals starting on December 2nd. And the key thing to remember is our portal will close for new applications January 27th, 2021. So please get your applications in if you're interested. And thank you all for joining today. Much appreciated.